Everyone, and welcome to World News Briefing. I'm Barry Stagner here in studio with Pastor Mike Macintosh. Mike,
Barry,
great to see you.
Thank you. Like we were just saying, we just had a show before the show here, just talking about all the news. Yeah, there's a lot burning today, isn't there?
There is.
Yeah.
I had trouble picking through what we can highlight today. But one bit of news before we jump in, especially for you here in California, Calvary Chapel Chino Hills is going to have a special event this Sunday morning that is going to be broadcast live here on his channel at 9:30 a.m. Pacific Daylight Savings Time. And that is John Cox, who is a gubernatorial candidate here in the state of California, is going to be sharing both his testimony and some of his positions on issues that matter to us as Christians in California. So tune in this Sunday morning right here at hischannel.com, 9:30 a.m. Pacific Daylight Savings Time for John Cox at live from Chino Hills, Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills, and Pastor Jack Hibbs.
Are we talking about John Cox, who's running for governor?
Yes.
Wow. He's a believer. I didn't know that.
Yes.
Because there's another one that Jack had just written me about, if I can get him into San Diego, and it wasn't the governor. He was running for attorney general. There's a Christian man running for that position.
Well, boy, we could use him here in California.
Oh, boy, could we.
Well, as we say all the time, Mike, today, again, as I mentioned a moment ago, the stories are just too many to compress into an hour.
Are.
So we'll try and hit some highlights. And one of the things I've been watching develop, as everyone else has who follows prophecy, is the fact that, as we talked many times before, things advance and then retreat a bit or ebb and flow in certain elements of prophecy and Scripture. And we seem to be having an advancement in the war and rumors of war category. Not that it's ever died out, but there seems to be a really strong push forward on multiple levels. And it all stems from the shooting down of a reconnaissance plane in Syria. And our first story, Russian reconnaissance plane, I should say. Our first story comes from Al Jazeera, and the headline reads, Russia delivers S-300 missile system to Syria. And Russia has completed the delivery of an S-300 surface-to-air missile system to the Syrian military as part of a new security measure following the downing of the Russian plane last month. Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu on Tuesday said at a meeting of the country's Security Council that its army had finished the deliveries of the systems, including a total of 4 launch platforms. Shoigu said it would take 3 months to train the Syrian military to operate the new air defense systems, while the integration of Russian and Syrian air defense assets into a single automated system will be completed by October 20th. We now control a close zone of up to 30 miles and a far zone of 124 miles from where attacks on the Syrian territory were launched, Shoigu said, and obviously reference to Israel.
Yes.
And the decision to deliver the modern defense system was reached following the shooting down of a Russian IL-20 reconnaissance aircraft, which accidentally was hit by a Syrian missile, killing 15 troops. So, Mike, we talked about over the past couple of weeks the fact that there were overtures made back and forth, Israel immediately, responding and offering their condolences to the Russian government, Putin coming out himself and directly saying this was not Israel's fault, and then everything unraveled after that. Putin has now come back and basically reneged on that statement and said, well, actually, now we know that there was one of the F-16s that was hiding under the radar shadow of that reconnaissance plane, and they were trying to slip through, and our plane got shot down because of Israel's negligence. So, again, looking at things moving forward, and now we've got the arrival of this S-300, a more advanced ground-to-air defense system being installed in Syria.
The point I take from that article that you just read is a couple of points. One, 124 miles. I think that would mean that if Israel or the United States were to send a cruise missile from a submarine or in the Mediterranean, that would cover anything past the coast. So they're really stretching 124 miles. That'd be like going from, San Diego all the way up here to Disneyland, almost, to L.A., pretty close to L.A. That's a long ways away. But the second point, Barry, is you brought out, they're going to be automated. Otherwise, the computer artificial intelligence will fire without a person controlling it, which could be very dangerous and could light the fuse for World War III. And the third thing is the fact that they are closing off the airspace. And this means Israel don't come in anymore and attack the suburbs of Damascus. So they made a mistake. They said it'll take 30 days to get it up and running.
Yeah.
Yeah. So within the next 30 days.
That story's coming up.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So, yeah. Well, yeah.
Our next story comes as a response from Israel, and of course you know there would be one, from the Israel National News, the paper called Arutz Sheva. And the headline reads, Israel to use F-35I stealth fighters in Syria. And Israel is going to use the stealth fighters to attack Syria, the Army radio reported. The decision comes after Syria began receiving its new S-300 surface-to-air missile defense system. The new system sold to Syria by Russia is intended to stop enemy planes, including, maybe even we should say especially, Israeli planes from attacking. And Gali Tazal quoted a source in the Israeli Air Force who said that in light of the situation in Syria, Israel has decided to increase the use of F-35 stealth fighters in its attacks on Syria. And the step is expected to allow the Air Force to better handle the growing threat in Syria, the source explained. Now, Mike, we had stories in the past of these very F-35s making their way not only into Syria and over Syria, but also into Iran and going undetected. So whether you have a automated system or not, if you can't detect the plane, it's going to be tough to shoot at it.
It's going to be tough. And that's a good connection you just tied together, because we were talking last month, the month before, about this, that was a warning to Iran. And we saw that Israel took planes across the airspace, past Russian radar, past Iranian radar, actually went over one of the sites, which they could have just pinged it and said, this is what it's going to be like. Now they're saying, go ahead and put your missile defense up, F-35. These planes are tens of millions of dollars because of the high technology. And not just that they come looking invisible on the radar, the electronics are beyond anything I think the Russians probably have that are inside those airplanes. So for them to say we're going to use these, and the U.S., quote unquote, invented the technology, and we have allowed them to build. Now China is trying to make something like that. But I think they've got a 30-day window then. If it's going to be up and running, why wouldn't they attack before it's up and running?
And Mike, our next story comes from the Jewish News Syndicate, which says Israel's war readiness is prepped as never before. And under the leadership of the current Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Gadi Eisenkot, the Israeli Defense Forces have been working diligently, relentlessly, and strategically to create a level of preparedness that has probably never existed to date among the ranks, despite ongoing issues and imperfections. A recent report composed by the Israeli military's critics has fiercely criticized the IDF's war readiness. It's a criticism that has touched a nerve among senior military command levels, and for good reason, as war readiness has been at the top of the agenda for the IDF since 2015. Now, the report didn't go unanswered for long. In recent days, senior IDF officials delivered a presentation before the defense minister showing him why the IDF was better prepared for war than ever before. And according to Army Radio, the presentation detailed drastic improvements made in recent years and was aimed at rebutting the previous claims. And a military establishment can never quite know if it's prepared for war until one erupts and its preparations are put to the test, the article says. And nevertheless, the IDF, under the leadership of the current Chief of Staff, Gadi Eisenkot, has been working diligently, relentlessly, and strategically to create a new level of war readiness. So, you know, again, we've got the war drums pounding.
Yeah.
And this has a multi-front application, Gaza, and then, of course, what's happening to the north with Syria, and on the other side of the country, Lebanon, and the ongoing threat from Hezbollah. But again, we just see this language again popping up regularly, even though there's references to it all over the world. It seems like Israel has a heightened state right now for war readiness and expecting something to happen. Maybe the window is as short as 30 days.
Yes, and Barry, we've heard this term before, but never about this. Never before have we ever been prepared like this.
Yeah.
First time ever. And it's interesting, they chose 2015. That's when they started. So 3 years. You can only imagine what they have created and made in 3 years and manufactured. That's when ISIS was at its peak. And Israel began to realize, okay, if it's genocide against the Christians, what is it going to be against the Jews? They're just practicing in Iraq and Syria to kill all the Christians and minority religions. Yeah. They know that they'll come into Israel and do that. But it is interesting. Something has kept the world at bay if they give that 2015 date. And now they're saying, we're ready. They probably were ready then in their understanding at the time, but that sounds pretty strong. We are ready, and nobody's going to stop us.
It is interesting, Mike, to consider so much of the things we've seen and learned as a country since the Gulf War, and seeing reporters giving away positions of our troops and other ridiculous things, how Israel responds to these things, and how in time past they've not responded to attacks when it's been cited in Arab newspapers that Israel did this, Israel did that. They remain silent, keep their cards close to the vest. But now it seems as though, as you mentioned, that it's time to step the game up, because this is going to a next level, so to speak, and we need to let them know that we're game and we're ready for any type of conflict.
That's just what that article said, didn't it? And it's interesting. We don't know what's going on with the population inside. There has to be an anxiety with this going on in Syria, so close by. I mean, the people have been under the threat of war, but now it's Russia, it's Iran, it's Turkey. It's like you've always said, it's Ezekiel 38. It's all the stand states that have come in from the broken down USSR. There's got to be an undercurrent that the people are weary of just the propaganda and this. And again, I honestly believe it'll be a first strike by Israel, not by Iran. They can't allow Iran to have a strike against them because it could cause a lot of death, but also, Barry, it could cause a lot of negative feelings around the world if Israel weren't able to defend itself. They'd just say, go ahead, Iran, do what you want to do. But I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think we're going to see something very strong here shortly.
Interesting. What you just mentioned, Mike, there's an article that just popped up from Reuters that Germany and Israel agree that Iran must never have nuclear weapons. And Germany agreed with them that Iran should not be allowed to acquire nuclear weapons, but they differ on how to achieve this goal. Chancellor Angela Merkel said on Thursday at a news conference with Prime Minister Netanyahu, we are very convinced and strongly share Israel's position that everything must be done to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. Where we are not always united is the path to this goal, Merkel said. She added Iran's military presence in Syria and Lebanon was a threat to Israel. Now, this is where things get, I think, a bit more interesting, and especially with Merkel's position and some of the other things we've seen with their position on the migrants coming into their country, the refugees, and other countries as well. It smacks of that globalistic mentality that, yes, of course, we have to take a stand against, Iranians advancing their centrifuges to the point where they have a nuclear grade of plutonium. And also we have to come about this at a way where, diplomacy is the vehicle that we use instead of, force. We just have to get away from this whole forcefulness. And you see that being manifested literally, especially in countries like Germany, on every level. They're allowing their own citizens to be raped and pillaged, and acts of violence to happen on German citizens for the sake of bringing in these refugees from war-torn countries. So it just smacks of the mentality that the Antichrist is going to take full advantage of as he, again, conquers the world with a covenant of peace for some 7 years.
Amazing. 3 weeks ago, maybe it's 4 programs ago, there was an article that I think we both had, and it was, I've got it probably in my other book. This is a brand new one to keep my notes in, but do you remember this article? It was about the first time ever the foreign minister and the head of the military of Russia went to Germany to interface with Merkel's leadership. Now, isn't it interesting? She's coming now to Israel. So I wonder what influence the Russians politically and militarily had to influence her, if at all. They came for some time. The article says it's the first time that Russia has ever sent the 2 departments at the same time somewhere. So we don't know, do we? And there is huge anti-Semitic movement taking place in Germany right now.
Yes, there is.
So we need to pray for the peace of Jerusalem.
Yes.
Yeah. A lot of deception out there.
Our next story comes from the Times of Israel, and the headline reads, Defense Minister orders IDF on high alert on Gaza border. So Lieberman says, troops ready to confront any scenario after Army bolsters forces around the security fence. Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman on Thursday said the IDF was on high alert on the border following weeks of nightly riots along the Gaza security fence. and he held an assessment session this afternoon on the situation in Gaza, together with the Chief of Staff, Head of Military Intelligence, Coordinator of Government Activities in the territories, and other security officials, the statement from his office stated. Lieberman instructed the IDF to maintain maximum preparedness for any scenario, according to his office. And Mike, there's that getting tired of this kind of thing again. And the violence in and along the Gaza fence has been escalating every single night. And the riots there, I believe yesterday there were 73 injured in the exchanges between the Gaza protesters and the IDF. And so this is just kind of getting, and this again plays into what we talked about a moment ago, people getting tired of all these things, all this strife, the internal strife. We see it in Iran. The people with boots on the ground are getting sick of this administration, and they continue to protest against it. And, the Ayatollah comes out and says, there's no way that these restrictions and sanctions that the U.S. has forced on them is going to overturn their administration.
That's right.
Yet it's an absolute travesty what's happening with the people on the street. The unemployment rate, so many young people out of work, tired of what's been going on in this Islamic regime. We see the same things happening in Jordan. We've seen some upheavals there as well.
That's right.
And Mike, it's just fascinating to see how all this is following exactly what the Lord said is going to happen, because what it's leading to is a universal cry globally of peace and safety. We're sick of this. No more war. We want to live in safety. Wow. And that's where all this is headed.
Well, the Associated Press had a headline this morning said, Iran Supreme Leader promises to slap U.S. and defeat the sanctions. And what you just said, I agree with. No, his hands have been slapped, and they aren't going to defeat the sanctions. And President Trump reversed everything with them and made that deal no longer any good. So billions of dollars that they're expecting aren't coming through. And the sanctions will be used without firing a bullet or a missile or anything. And I bet this will trigger, was it 3 summers ago, the college-age people were out in the streets of Tehran by the thousands and the thousands, and they were begging the Obama administration to come and set them free, and there was no motion there. Instead, they supported the bad guys. So, Barry, Iran is in a very precarious place, like you say. They've stretched themselves with 13 bases in Syria, so they've moved over close now to the border of Jordan. They've got people all around the world. They've got cell groups inside the USA, and they're falling apart. And these thugs at the top that treat their people like they treat them, they exist because of money. The Bible says the love of money is the root of all evil. And when a person is at the top, he is either put at the top by the Lord or by the devil. And that's in the music industry, that's in the movie industry, that's in the car industry. You get to the top either by one of those two, the Lord or the devil. And these people are not speaking for the Lord. They're speaking a lot of hate and death. And Jesus said, I came to bring life and life more abundantly. So it's not going to stick around much more. It's going to be interesting to see how it could fall in Tehran, but still attack Israel from Syria. They're in a precarious place right now. They're going to have to make some decisions of backing off of some of these threats they're making.
They are, and some of those who are supporters of them are tiring of their constant shenanigans, and including the Russians. These in Turkey, these are really ancient enemies, countries that have never cooperated together, and now they're moving against ISIS collectively. And Putin came out and said even today that, that all forces, all foreign armies need to vacate Syria at the end of the civil war. So I didn't see a parenthesis at the end of his statement, and there should be one that says except Russia.
Well, what would our audience can go online and figure this out. That's a good statement. Go find out what it costs to make one S-300, and then you'll figure out how many millions just for that, and how many hundreds of millions of dollars to lengthen that field they did 3 years ago up in the northern border, and to have a Typhoon-class submarine anchored off the north coast of Israel. Tens and tens, hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars have been poured in while their economy is bad. The only thing that saved them right now is that oil has gone from $29 a barrel up to about Is it 61 or
No,
81?
pushing $80.
It's $80 right now, yeah. So he needs, and this has been known by the CIA and everybody, he needs over $100, like $109 to $129 for Russia to just keep their head above the water. So the world community has said no to him by keeping the prices subdued. And I think this is good because good to know, because most people aren't thinking in these terms, but we have some pretty intelligent people that are keeping peace and safety without missiles. And I like what you said. I had not thought of that before. People are getting weary of war and all these shenanigans, and it's the temperature of the heartbeat is getting to, we're tired of all this war and the trillions and billions being spent on killing people. And somebody's going to stand up with the answer. But they think there's going to be, quote unquote, a cataclysmic event that's going to happen. I'm hoping it's the rapture of the church, that we will just be gone, and when the salt is not there to preserve things, we'll see the third temple go up, and we'll see the end of the age come. And it's very close. It's exciting. It's exciting, actually, really to be alive right now. That you and I, the last 3 years, we've seen it get closer and closer, and like you said, there's an ebb and flow. And for so many times we'll talk about Jerusalem and Israel, and then we'll move it. But this is moving on a global scale today, that around the world there's an uneasiness. People are tired of what the leadership is doing. Just look at the Kavanaugh case in America. I think even Democrats are sick of this, of what's being done.
Yeah, right and truth have no place anymore. And it's just simply who can win. And
that's
win at any cost.
And if I don't win, I'll take my ball and go home.
That's right. Our next story is kind of interesting, and it's along those same lines, Mike, because, it's one of the things I think that's difficult for most people to understand is the loss of rational thought. Just the things we have with gender identity and all these other things that are, it's just, come on, give me a break. It's biologically ridiculous. To propose that there are beyond two genders, male and female, and of course there are the exceptions in the chromosomal sense to the normal makeup and DNA of human beings, and we do have those, who have a mutation that is not part of the normal categorizing of humans into male and female.
Yeah.
But, this next I thought was such an interesting story. And it, again, it's coming from the Israel National News. And it's a statement made by John Bolton. And it is the most rational statement, as he tends to be prone to give.
Yep.
And he said this. He said, Palestine is not a state. At a White House presser, National Security Advisor John Bolton insists Palestine has no claim to statehood. And U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton announced tonight, Wednesday, at a White House press briefing that the U.S. had decided to leave the optional protocol on dispute resolution of the UN's Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. The protocol provides a mechanism whereby signatory states may take each other to the International Court of Justice to settle diplomatic disputes. Bolton explained that the move was brought about by the so-called State of Palestine, challenging the move of the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem at the International Court, stating bluntly that Palestine is not a state. It's not a state now. It does not meet the customary international law test of statehood, he said. It doesn't control defined borders. It doesn't fulfill normal functions of a government. There are a whole host of reasons why it's not a state. Could become a state, as the president said, but that requires diplomatic negotiations with Israel and others, he added.
That's right.
We have consistently across Democratic and Republican administrations opposed the admission of Palestine to the UN as a state because it's not a state. Now, that's rational thinking there, and again, why they have a voice at the UN is just beyond me, other than we recognize they have a voice at the UN because the world is moving toward what Zechariah prophesied, and that is a unified stance against Israel.
That's right. And John Bolton is in the category of, I think, Alan Dershowitz from Harvard Law School. He's a brilliant man. He's a very clear thinker, and he has a global picture. And that was very, very simple and concise, but it was brilliant because it's truth. Palestine is not a state. They don't have a state voice. They're not in the Bible anywhere. They can't find their history. It's just it's people that hate Jewish people that have taken over that group of people, because I know Palestinians, they love Israel, they love the Jews, they love Christians, they are Christians. And the same in Lebanon. All around there are Christian people and non-Christian that have no problem. In the early days of the 70s when I was going to Israel, that's one of the first things that caught my attention was these people are living side by side in Jerusalem. Arabs over here and Jews over here, and they're walking in the streets together, and they've done it ever since 1948. Isn't it interesting? It's the people on the outside that are trying to dictate the mood and the heartbeat inside. And the inside, it's like living in the U.S. or in London or somewhere. It's very modern, it's upbeat, it's cool, but they have to... It's like if you'd unleash them, let them use their brains, the world could have so many new inventions right now instead of all the trillions they've put into their military since 1948. Isn't that interesting how the devil just twists a couple things, like you say the Palestinians aren't a state, but they act like a state. Everybody thinks they have a voice, but they don't. And the voice that does speak for them is one of hatred. And
interesting, a boss has a opportunity to speak to the UN, and one other group that is associated by whether it's their ethnicity or their ideology has a voice without a country at the UN. It just doesn't make any sense. It's the United Nations. Well, they're not a nation. Yeah. Of course, they hope to be a nation, but I would mention again what they call the UN in Israel. It's either the United Nobody or the United Nothing. And that's really about the value of their contribution to the world today. But Mike, again, just looking at things as we've been talking about, they seem to be advancing in the military front. We know this is one of the things that Jesus said is going to have just a sudden increase in the last days prior to his return. It will be that of wars and rumors of wars, ethnic tensions around the world, as well as nations rising against nation, and wars and rumors of wars, as we're seeing very clearly here today. So we've come up on a break. We've got some interesting stories happening around the world. As we've been talking about in recent weeks, the earth is groaning and travailing, and boy, is it ever. So we've got a few stories along that line to cover in the second half. So stick around. We'll be right back in just a minute.
Imagine being in Israel as the sun is rising over the Sea of Galilee, or walking on the streets of Jerusalem, visiting the city of Nazareth, or having a Bible study in Capernaum at the Apostle Peter's house. In October of 2019, Pastor Tom Hughes will be leading a tour to the land of Jesus. We will explore Israel together and bring the Bible to life before your very eyes. We will visit Caesarea by the sea and Joppa, where Jonah caught a boat going in the wrong direction. We'll take a boat ride on the Sea of Galilee, just as Peter did when he walked on water. We will walk on the Mount of Olives and through the Garden of Gethsemane. You will have the opportunity to explore the Temple Mount and visit at the Western Wall and even go underneath the Temple Mount. You'll be able to visit the City of David and Hezekiah's tunnel. And have you ever wanted to float on the Dead Sea or visit the cave where David cut the corner of King Saul's robe? Or perhaps spending a morning at Masada? These are just some of the once-in-a-lifetime experiences you will have when you join us on our 2019 Israel trip. If you'd like more information or want to sign up for this trip, visit the events page at 412church.org.
The War of Ezekiel. We are watching events unfold that were predicted over 2,600 years ago concerning the invasion of Israel by a coalition of nations. Who are the participants? When is this battle going to happen? What nations protest the invasion? What are the signs that indicate this event is near? Find out in this overview, The War of Ezekiel. Barry Stagner's powerful DVD, The War of Ezekiel, is our gift to you this month for any donation of $5 or more. Your prayers and generous support enable his channel to continue to broadcast the good news of Christ around the world. Simply go to hischannel.com, click the donation link, or send your tax-deductible gift to his channel. Post Office Box 25, Santa Ana, California, 92702.
Welcome back, everyone. And as always, we'd like to thank you for your support of his channel. And I hope you're picking up on the urgency that we have, as well as the other programs about the shortness of time. You know, Jesus said there are things we could look for when it's time for us to look up, because our redemption is nigh. And boy, are we seeing them all around us. And our thank you gift this month is from somebody I know personally. It's a message I gave on the War of Ezekiel, and it details some of the things that we can know for sure. And it also points out some of the things that there are is room for interpretation on. So I think you'll find it to be encouraging and informative as a thank you for your gift this month. And, Mike, there's a couple of other things we'll spend the balance of our program talking about that are rising to the surface as far as focus or focal points, if you will, regarding the last days scenario. And one of them we talked about a bit last week with this surveillance system in China that, has an interesting name, as it compares itself to one of the characteristics of God. It's called omnipresent. It's everywhere simultaneously, and it's keeping a citizen score to reward good citizens with faster internet speed and, other things like this. It's like giving an animal a treat, for a good performance, and treating humans about the same. But that highlighted for us the role that technology is going to play in the last days as we're moving toward that advanced system of world governance and monitoring that's going to come into play via the Antichrist. And there's some type of image that is constructed by man that is powered by potentially artificial intelligence and the other things that are related to that particular issue during the last days. But it demands a rise in technological advances, and we have seen that, including our next couple of stories. And this one comes from Reuters, where the U.S. warns of a new hacking spree from a group linked to China. The U.S. government on Wednesday warned that a hacking group widely known as Cloudhopper, which Western cybersecurity firms have linked to the Chinese government, has launched attacks on technology service providers in a campaign to steal data from their clients. The Department of Homeland issued a technical alert for Cloudhopper, which said it was engaged in cyber espionage and theft of intellectual property after experts with two prominent U.S. cybersecurity companies warned earlier this week that Chinese hacking activity has surged amid the escalating trade war between Washington and Beijing. Chinese authorities have repeatedly denied claims by Western cybersecurity firms that it supports hacking, and Homeland Security released the information to support U.S. companies in responding to attacks by the group, which is targeting information technology, energy, healthcare, communications, and manufacturing firms. And these cyber threat actors are still active, and we strongly encourage our partners in government and in its industry to work together to defend against this threat, Department of Homeland Security official Christopher Krebs said in a statement. Now, Mike, this reminds us again that in order for one man and his cohorts to control the world's commerce, there has to be a system available by which that can be done. And now we're seeing the efforts of governments trying to control what's happening in other countries, or even using it as a combat strategy against a nation that has attacked it economically, like with the tariffs against China that we have issued under President Donald Trump. And now they're responding not with a military hardware, but rather with software. And interesting to see this now portion of cyber warfare making its way to the surface.
Well, it is. And at the same time, though, Barry, there's pictures on the internet now of a Russian warship coming within 45 yards of the USS Decatur as our military was just cruising through the Sea of China over there where they've...
Chinese warship.
Yeah, Chinese warship came up against the U.S. 45 yards away. That's a half a football field.
It's less. This was one of the articles we reported this week, and I thought this illustration was put it rather succinctly. It's less than a catcher's throw to second base.
Well, just last weekend, a couple of the quarterbacks threw 60-yard touchdowns, So that's how close they were. Yeah. So at the same time, they're doing this electronic invasion thing. That's an amazing thing because people are so tied to it. And it is just waiting to be taken over and taxed. The governments, the state governments, and around the world, they could be making billions of dollars. So it's a war weapon right now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Very, very
interesting you bring that issue up, Mike, because there's been efforts that seem to move forward and advance for the moment, and it will come given enough time, and that is the charge on emails.
Yes.
Because the postal system around the world has been impacted by this
and
is in financial distress all over the world. The USPS has had more than its share of financial struggles. And, in our lifetime, Mike, I don't remember anything lower than this, but you and I aren't that old, but I remember stamps being a nickel. And now just in this short span of time, it took all those years to get up to a nickel, but then it goes up to 50-some-odd cents, whatever it is right now.
I am older.
In the spans of a single lifetime.
I am older because I remember 3 cents.
Oh, you do? Okay.
But isn't that something? I mean, it costs you, well, if you're, doing cost accounting in a church or business, you look at that, it's well over $1 to send somebody a letter because of the stamp, the envelope, the time, the secretary, the person doing the typing, having the typewriter, all that.
Yeah.
So it's expensive, but you can go on and make deals anywhere in the world on the internet through email. And it has hurt the whole world, all the postal services.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting, Mike, if we look at some of these things also regarding technology that have been beneficial to us, it has afforded some of the things that we're about to see maybe as a first. Amazon is reported to become the first $1 trillion company in the history of the world, and that's because of online purchasing. And again, so there we've got commerce being conducted, and more department stores are feeling an impact. They're not seeing the huge Black Friday sales that they have in the time past. And the Christmas season, all the sales have been waning as far as foot traffic and purchases made inside a department store. But commerce through technology has just been going through the roof over the past few years, and it's convenient, and it has a lot of other negative things too. It kind of diminishes the social engagement and all those other things that are good for any healthy society. Reuters says that Britain says Russian military intelligence is behind a host of global cyber attacks. And Britain accused Russian military intelligence on Thursday of directing a host of cyber attacks aimed at undermining Western democracies by sowing confusion in everything from the 2016 U.S. presidential election to the global chemical weapons watchdog. In a British assessment based on work by its National Cybersecurity Center, Russian military intelligence was cast as a pernicious cyber aggressor, which used a network of hackers to spread discord across the world. GRU, which is the arm of the government, Russian government of military intelligence, Britain said, was almost certainly behind the Bad Rabbit and World Anti-Doping Agency attacks of 2017, also behind the hack of the DNC committee in 2016, or the DNC rather, in 2016, and the theft of emails from a UK-based TV station in 2015. The Netherlands said it caught 4 Russian GRU officers red-handed as they tried to hack into the organization for the prohibition of chemical weapons from a hotel next door in April. So, again, we've got another major player on the world scene using the internet and using cyber technology to disrupt what's going on in other countries, influence elections, as we have heard more times than we would like to in recent years. But as the adage goes today, the threat is real.
It is real. There's a T-shirt you can get, Israel is real.
Yes.
You ever seen that T-shirt for sale over there?
I do.
Listen, this raises a little bit of a flag for me because it takes us back to the first or second article you had about Merkel being the leader of Germany in Israel with Netanyahu, and their talking friendship when we tied together the foreign minister of Russia and the chief military minister going at the same time to meet with Merkel's government. They apparently had some message to give. So now when we say China and Russia are bombarding the world and breaking into computers and hacking, I think we should take this seriously because 2 months ago, China told Russia that if you go to war with the USA, we will stand with you. They also are the 2 leading proponents for a new World Bank order of cash order. They want their own, not the U.S. dollar in charge anymore. So they have agreements they've made behind the scenes. And I'm just wondering if that's why the military and the foreign ministry went to Germany to say, you better get in line because we're ready to do some things, and showed some pictures and satellites and whatever, and Merkel goes over and starts talking to Netanyahu, and then the next article, Netanyahu says F-35s, we don't care what you say, we're ready to go. We're the most ready ever in our history. It just seems like all this jockeying position, we keep forgetting that the enemies of Israel are tied together. They have a common hatred.
It's interesting, too, Mike, to think about some of the things we know about the tribulation period and some of the warfare conducted there with the advanced weaponry we have. We know some of the battles and encounters later in the tribulation are fought on horseback.
Yes.
And also we know that the rider on the first horse, when the first seal is opened in Revelation 6, goes forth with a bow to conquer. But there's no munitions or an arrow mentioned there. And we made the point before that the bow, it's the same Greek word used in the Septuagint version of the Old Testament for rainbow, and it's symbolic of a covenant that God made with the earth, and therefore could be that the rider goes forth with a covenant, as Daniel 9 says, and makes it with the whole earth. But the interesting thing about that is, if we consider this, if you can disable another country's ability to control their weaponry, which is all mechanized and basically run drones, whatever, run through some type of computer system. If you can disable that, you just won the battle with that country.
That's
without ever firing a shot.
So then it could be that John was seeing this new technology in the first rider on the white horse, but not knowing the words to say it was a computer, or through technology he's coming to conquer. And the weapons weren't in the bow. We don't even know if it had a string on it, had a bow. Yeah. Then it could have been a rainbow, and then that stands for a whole group of people around the world. He is doing, wasn't it Paul that said, about 14 years ago, I knew of a man, I don't know, in the spirit, out of the spirit. He was taken up into the third heaven, and he saw things that were unspeakable by man. And I don't think it was that man was said, don't speak about these things. I don't think man had the vocabulary to say how beautiful the things are in heaven. And maybe that's what, I never thought of that until you brought it up. Maybe that's what he's saying. I see something that has to do with the military, but it's not the way I know it. Well,
we know, Revelation is introduced as a book that is using signs and symbols.
Yes.
In order to communicate a message that would be understandable in all points of history. That's why John uses the descriptive phrases that he uses to describe some of the things he sees and hears, like, voice with the sound of many waters. What season of history is that not going to be understood? Or like a trumpet. There were trumpets then, there's trumpets today. And everybody would understand basically what was being said.
Yes.
And that's why I think it's curious that he mentions the number of horsemen. So he knows what a horse is, and he knows what a man is. So obviously he's not using figurative language to try and describe something he's never seen or understood.
Yeah.
He's talking about something literal. So this is important because it potentially tells us and explains to us why we see horseback battles in the age of mechanized weaponry like we have today. So who knows? But it is curious to see that this is now a major component of military engagement between countries, trying to disable their cyber system in order to dismantle their ability to respond. So
that's right.
Interesting, to see these things rising to the surface.
Those four horsemen of the apocalypse are very interesting in that light, when you realize he's describing things that he understands, but there's much more going on. And I've always loved the three words, the Greek words that it says, and after these things, metatauta, which literally means after this event, then comes this.
Next in line.
Next in line. You take chapter 1, Jesus reveals himself. He's resurrected. Chapter 2 and 3, the church age. Chapter 4, up into heaven. Chapter 5, you see the church singing. Chapter 6, the Lord opens the seals, and then the judgments come. And we're probably right there now at that last church, in the third chapter, that it's time to go home.
Yes. Interesting, Mike. There are those who see, because of the color of the mount of the rider with the bow but no weapons is white. That always seems to, in some people's minds, symbolize the good guy. But we know this is the second coming of Christ, as some say, because the rider on the second horse takes peace from the earth. And if Jesus brings peace, nobody's taking it back.
That's right.
You know, once he comes and brings the ultimate peace, until he releases Satan for a short time after 1,000 years.
That's right. Chuck Smith,
nobody's going to reverse what he has done.
Right. That's what Chuck would say. He would say, for the preterist and the people that believe that we're in the tribulation, that 1,000 years he's chained. He must have an awful long chain.
He's got a long chain.
Yeah.
That's right. Another story, Mike, along those same lines, and this comes from a website called Futurism. And the headline reads, Glimpse, How Electronic Tattoos Will Change the World and Ourselves. Biological 3D printers could repair spinal cord injuries and usher us into a post-computer era. It's the stuff of cyberpunk science fiction. Tattoos adorned with flashing lights and sophisticated circuitry. They'll monitor our vitals, we're told, and feed us personalized health advice in real time. They'll wire our biology to the web and put the Internet of Things at our fingertips. They'll enhance our five senses and perhaps even give us new ones. And this type of human augmentation is depicted in Circuits, the first episode of Glimpse, a new original sci-fi series from Futurism Studios. And Dust, watch the episode below according to the website, and it is interesting to see the things they're talking about. But these things just aren't in a movie. These things are real,
That's right.
and they're being developed. And thanks to a recent development in advanced materials and biomedical engineering, wearable electronics to do all of these things are almost here.
Wow.
We already have biocompatible materials that allow electronics to seamlessly fuse with the body. We've already developed e-tattoos that can control a smartphone. Now it's just a matter of refining and improving upon those technologies. And in April, Michael McAlpine, a mechanical engineering professor at University of Minnesota, published a study in the journal Advanced Materials in which he demonstrated a way to print electronics directly onto the skin. The device is cheap, it's accessible, and it's compact, and it already offers groundbreaking applications for the military and for medicine. In the future, it could completely change how we interact with the world around us. And Futurism recently spoke with McAlpine about his research in the future of printable electronics and e-tattoos. Now, Mike, this is curious. I've said this for a long time, and I think this kind of underscores the point. You know, we've gone from the old Billy Graham movies when the mark of the beast was a massive barcode on somebody's forehead and all those things, because that was the technology that was new to us and had that potential to monitor or at least give an account for all human presence by a numbering system. But it would have the capability to number all of mankind. And then we, heard and saw a lot about the RFID, the radio frequency implant devices,
Yes.
which still, in a lot of people's minds make their way into their thinking regarding how the mark of the beast will be applied. But the thing I've always found interesting is this is a mark. It's something that lays on top of the skin. It's not, the language there doesn't indicate anything implanted or below the skin or the surface of the skin, but it's a mark which would be likened unto, linguistically, a tattoo. So here now we've got a biotat which has capabilities to interact with a website, which would therefore, or the internet, which would therefore give it the capacity to be a part of the system that monitors all global commerce.
That's close, isn't it? We're close. And isn't it interesting that this generation, my children's generation, accepted tattoos. Now, my generation, if you had a tattoo, you were either in the Navy or you were a motorcycle guy.
Right.
And regular people in society didn't wear them. It was a mark. You were a criminal probably if you had tattoos.
Yeah.
Now you can turn on television, you can watch cop shows and the detectives of this and that, different shows, and you'll see officers on duty, short-sleeve shirts with tattoos. That is a lowering of the standards. That was never allowed in law enforcement for whatever reason. But now you see people with tattoos on their legs and their ankles and all over their body. So this generation has been set up to mark your body.
Yeah.
And now the next generation, the younger ones that are, quote-unquote, the millennials, that don't have any direction really of where they're going, according to social engineers saying this, Barry, they would accept. What are you saying we have to do? We have to Oh, yeah, no problem. Go ahead.
It blinks and flashes. It's got all kinds of lights on it, and I can wear it all the time.
And that, my friend, just reminded me one of the greatest scourges in America, and especially Southern California, are the raves.
Yeah.
And that's all about the blinking and the flashing of the lights and the girls getting raped on the dance floor in Southern California. It's horrible. If you're an adult, don't let your kids ever go to a rave. But that's the whole thing. They have the white gloves, like the Mickey Mouse gloves, and if somebody's overdosing, they come with the bracelets on them and the lights flashing, and they calm them down, do hand things for them. So now you're talking about somebody's going to accept a tattoo that you don't have to ink in, but it'll lay there and do a light show for me.
Yeah.
It could even send a code, couldn't it? I guess 3 reds and a blue mean the letter B. It would print your name out when you walked up to be. It could do about anything.
Well, according to the article, it could tell you if your blood pressure's going up, or, if your blood sugar's high or whatever.
So it's already
again reminds us that this is going to be presented in a positive.
Oh yeah,
it's not going to be hey, everybody take the mark or we'll kill you. It's going to be take the mark. This is beneficial to society, identifies you as one being for the state and the global system of governance, and allows you to buy and sell, positive.
It'll stop human trafficking.
Yes, drug sales, all cash business,
Right.
A lot of positives. But there's a downside to this, too. Rather interestingly, the next article, this comes from NPR, the National Public Radio, and the printed article said India's biometric ID system has led to starvation for some poor advocates are saying. India has 1.3 billion people and no equivalent of a social security number. And about 4 in 10 births go unregistered. And less than 2% of the population pays income tax. Many more are eligible for welfare benefits, but may have never collected them, either because they can't figure out how or some middleman steals their share. To try to address these issues, the Indian government rolled out the biggest biometric ID system in the world. It's voluntary, but in just 8 years, India has managed to collect the fingerprints, photos, and iris scans of more than 1.2 billion people.
Oh, my goodness.
And from there, all you got to do is climb up to 7 billion or however many are left after the rapture.
And you said week 4 last, the article was it last week? 400,
China?
Yeah, 480 million facial recognition cameras.
Yeah.
Wow.
And again,
so that would be nothing. 1.9 be nothing.
Right.
You're almost there.
Yeah,
You're
it's
a
already
third of the way there. Yeah.
Yep. And now here,
fourth.
This system, its weaknesses are being pointed out. One, talking about the fact that there are many there who their birth isn't even registered, and so they don't have a number or an opportunity to be scanned or an awareness that they need to be. So some people, and the article cites some instances and names of people who have actually starved to death because they didn't have access to this system. So again, this is presented in a must-do type of situation. And again, it's biometrics.
It's biometrics.
Something that interacts with your humanity, so to speak.
I have a friend that's a very close friend. He's a biometric, biochemistry PhD. San Diego, like San Jose area, the Silicon Valley became technology. San Diego's become a center for inventions to do with the future of health. We had a discussion last week, in fact, and I asked him, what's new in your field, because his field is way out there. There's things he is telling about our genes. That our genetic, we'll be able to eventually buy a kit at the drugstore, test our genetics, and if we have diabetes, that we'd be able to do a special thing, and it'll take that out and put a strengthened thing that'll go into our system. When they start talking about these things, that's one thing to say we're in research. But to talk about it and say this is how it's going to be used, they're beyond the research. They know it's going to work.
It's already being used.
Yeah.
1.2 billion people already have it.
It's just unbelievable.
It is amazing. A couple of headlines, I'll read them, Mike.
7 billion isn't that far away.
With some good news.
Okay.
British city protests Franklin Graham visit with a rainbow-colored Jesus. He was in Blackpool, England for his Festival of Hope. And there were 9,000 people in attendance, 200 churches participated, and there was opposition from both city officials and LGBT activists because Franklin Graham believes the Bible. Second thing, we had the ricin attempt, the
Yes.
letters that were delivered to the Pentagon and others. And then the last thing I wanted to mention was, Mike, we have an increase of seismic events going on in the world. Remembering that seismos means not only things that happen geologically, but atmospherically. The word can also mean not just an earthquake, it can also mean a gale or a tempest. And here we've got USA Today is reporting that a volcano has now erupted in Indonesia days after a devastating earthquake followed by a tsunami. And the last thing I'll mention is that the Washington Post says there are 2 monster tropical cyclones raging in the Pacific Ocean. So, Mike, we just hit the 3-minute mark, so I'll let you close it up.
Well, that volcano is blowing up where the tsunami was, and the last I saw was over 1,400 people dead. Oh, how sad. Well, ladies and gentlemen, there is good news, and these things that Barry and I have been discussing are available to find by anybody. We might have some friends that know things that most people don't, but we never leak anything. But I want to tell you some really good news. This is about the Lord Jesus Christ, and it's a short, very short story from the 21st chapter of the Gospel of John, and it's just 4 or 5 verses. I'd like to read this to you. It's after he has risen from the dead. He shows himself to the disciples. Peter and Thomas and Nathaniel and the sons of Zebedee were together fishing. Peter said, "I go fishing." They said, "We'll come with you." Well, they immediately got into the boat that night. They caught nothing all night. And then the morning had now come. Jesus stood on the shore and he said, "Children, have you caught anything yet?" And they answered back, "No." I think it's interesting he called them children. Sometimes we disciples think we're big shots or we're bigger than we really are, but even when we get to heaven and see Jesus, we've got to keep our place. And he says, "Well, you know what? There's a multitude of fish. Just cast your net on the other side." And so, "Well, we've done this all night. We're fishermen. Who are you?" And Peter shouts out, "It's the Lord." And the boys began to row to shore. But here's the crazy thing. We see Peter throughout the New Testament of really being strong, bold, courageous, outspoken, but also impetuous. He moves a little fast. It says in one translation that he put on his clothes and he dove into the water and swam ashore. So he's something to watch. Usually you don't go fishing without your clothes on, but he did. But when they get ashore, here is the Lord Jesus broiling fish, not baking fish, cooking fish, filleting fish, not making fish tacos. He is broiling. He knows how to cook. So he knows to tell where the fish are, but he knows everything about your life, everything, and he knows what it's going to take to fix your heart. And I'd like to encourage you this very day, this very moment, to just call out to Jesus. Nevertheless, at your word, give him a chance to come into your soul and give you a brand new birth, because his blood was shed for your sins, and he will forgive you of your sins, and he will give you eternal life, where all the news will continually be good news.
Thank you, Mike.
Okay.
Remember, this Sunday morning, 9:30 a.m. Pacific Daylight Savings Time, John Cox, a candidate for governor here in the state of California, that is, will be at Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills. He's going to share his testimony, and he's going to give his position on the issues that are vital to us as Christians. So make sure you tune in, 9:30 right here at hischannel.com. this coming Sunday morning, October 7th. So for Pastor Mike Macintosh, I'm Barry Stagner, wishing you a very blessed week, reminding you Christians, tell people about Jesus.
The War of Ezekiel. We are watching events unfold that were predicted over 2,600 years ago concerning the invasion of Israel by a coalition of nations. Who are the participants? When is this battle going to happen? What nations protest the invasion? What are the signs that indicate this event is near? Find out in this overview, The War of Ezekiel. Barry Stagner's powerful DVD, The War of Ezekiel, is our gift to you this month for any donation of $5 or more. Your prayers and generous support enable his channel to continue to broadcast the good news of Christ around the world. Simply go to hischannel.com, click the donation link, or send your tax-deductible gift to his channel. Post Office Box 25, Santa Ana, California, 92702.